In the heart of Germany, where the Ruhr River carves its path through a land rich with coal and iron, a story was forged over 4 centuries, a story of a single family whose name would become as hard and as durable as the steel they mastered. This is the saga of the House of Krupp, a dynasty that rose from the humble dust of a merchant's shop to command an industrial empire of unparalleled might. Their fate was not merely tied to the destiny of Germany. For generations, they helped to write it, in molten steel and in blood. Their cannons shattered armies and redrew the borders of Europe. Their armor plated the warships of Kaisers, and their factories became the roaring, smoke-belching heart of a nation's ambition. The Krupp name became a byword for unyielding strength, but also for the terrifying application of that strength. They were the patriarchs of progress, building railways that stitched a nation together. Yet they were also the merchants of death, their innovations measured in the range of their artillery. They walked with kings and counseled emperors. And then, in Germany's darkest hour, they made a pact with a Führer, their enterprise swelling to monstrous proportions as it fed a machine of conquest and genocide. It is a tale of a secret formula for steel that became a license to print money and forge empires. It is a story of towering siege guns that pulverized fortresses and of the chilling efficiency of production lines that, in the end, were fueled by the lives of enslaved human beings. From the soot-stained workshops of Essen to the gilded halls of Villa Hügel, from the thunder of the Western Front to the cold silence of the Nuremberg docks, the story of the Krupps is a profound and unsettling epic of innovation, hubris, complicity, and the terrible, enduring question of moral responsibility. Our story begins not in a palace or on a battlefield, but in the grim reality of a 16th-century city bracing for death. In 1587, a merchant named Arndt Krupp arrived in the bustling, independent city-state of Essen. He was a trader, likely in Dutch textiles and spices, a man with a keen eye for profit. As fate would have it, his arrival coincided with the coming of the Black Death. As plague swept through the city, panic sent the wealthy fleeing, desperate to sell their homes and lands for any price. Arndt, with an instinct for opportunity that would become a family hallmark, did not flee. He stayed, and he bought. He acquired houses, workshops, and plots of land at fire sale prices, laying the foundation of the family's fortune amidst a landscape of death. For the next century, the Krupps solidified their position as solid, respectable burghers. They were not nobles, but influential members of Essen's merchant class. When the 30 Years' War tore the German lands apart in a whirlwind of religious fury and political chaos, Arndt's descendants again saw opportunity. His son, Anton, astutely pivoted into the arms trade, financing the production of musket barrels and small cannons for the warring armies. It was an early and fateful marriage of the family's fortune to the technology of warfare. For generations, they thrived in this manner, their wealth growing through trade, real estate, and small local industries. The true pivot from commerce to industry, however, was driven by the will of a woman. In the late 18th century, the formidable family matriarch, Helene Amalie Krupp, found herself widowed at the age of just 25. Rejecting the conventional path of retreat and remarriage, she took the reins of the family business with a visionary's grasp. She saw that the future lay not in trading goods, but in controlling the means of production. With relentless energy, she began acquiring the raw materials of the dawning industrial age, coal mines to fuel the furnaces, and iron ore deposits to feed the forges. In 1800, she purchased a blast furnace and an iron foundry. allowing the family, for the first time, to smelt its own iron. By the time of her death in 1810, the widow Krupp had transformed the family from merchants into proto-industrialists. Essen was no longer just their home. It was their crucible. Upon this foundation, Helene's ambitious grandson, Friedrich, would stake everything on a single, obsessive quest to unlock the most jealously guarded industrial secret of the age, the British method for producing high-quality cast steel. At the time, Sheffield steel was the world's gold standard, a metal so fine and strong it was essential for the best tools, springs, and weapons. When Napoleon's continental blockade cut off British goods, Friedrich saw his chance to break their monopoly. In 1811, he founded a small, dedicated steel workshop, pouring the family's considerable resources into a gamble that bordered on madness. He became an alchemist of the industrial age, tinkering endlessly with furnaces and fluxes, convinced he could replicate the English magic. He was chasing a ghost. The process was agonizingly slow, a frustrating dance of trial and error. He produced small, promising batches of crucible steel, but he could never achieve reliable, large-scale production. His experiments devoured the family fortune, his furnaces consuming capital as voraciously as they consumed coal. His health broke under the strain of his obsession and the crushing weight of impending failure. When Friedrich Krupp died in 1826, he was only 39 years old. He left behind a nearly bankrupt company, a steel works that had ground to a halt, and a 4-year-old son, Alfred, who inherited not a fortune, but a legacy of debt and a seemingly impossible dream. It was from these ashes of failure that the true Krupp empire would be born. In the wake of Friedrich's death, the Krupp enterprise teetered on the brink of oblivion. Creditors circled like vultures, and the family's proud name was whispered with pity in the merchant halls of Essen. The burden of survival fell upon Friedrich's widow, Therese, a woman of quiet grit who, like the formidable Helena Marley before her, refused to let the family's ambition die. While the dream of steel was put on hold, she kept the traditional businesses, the forges, and merchandising alive, paying the bills and keeping the workshop doors from being permanently shuttered. At her side was her young son, Alfred, pulled from school at 14. His formal education was sacrificed for a harsher apprenticeship in the soot and struggle of the family firm. He learned the business not from ledgers, but from the factory floor, his hands calloused by the tools of the trade, his mind sharpened by the constant threat of insolvency. These were the lean years, a crucible that forged Alfred Krupp into a man of almost superhuman resolve and austere discipline. For over a decade, the family simply scraped by. The breakthrough, when it came, was not from a grand invention but from a humble one. Alfred's younger brother, Hermann, devised a clever machine for rolling flawless steel spoon blanks. This seemingly mundane innovation was a commercial godsend. The market was flooded with affordable high-quality Krupp cutlery, and the steady stream of cash it generated became the lifeblood that revived the firm. With this newfound financial stability, Alfred could finally return to his father's obsession, the mastery of cast steel. This time, there would be no failure. Hardened by years of adversity and armed with a profound, hands-on understanding of metallurgy, Alfred systematically conquered the challenges that had broken his father. By the mid-1840s, the Krupp works had not only unlocked the secret of crucible steel, but had perfected its production in substantial, reliable quantities. The Holy Grail was his. And now, He was poised to show the world what his new metal could do. His stage was the Great Exhibition of 1,851 inches London, a glittering showcase of global industrial prowess held in the spectacular Crystal Palace. Amidst the marvels of the age, Alfred Krupp, the provincial German steelmaker, unveiled two items that would make his name legendary overnight. The first was a revolutionary cannon cast not from bronze, but entirely from a single, solid piece of his superior steel. The second, and more astonishing, was the ingot from which it had been forged, a flawless, 2-ton block of solid cast steel, the largest the world had ever seen. The British steelmakers of Sheffield, the undisputed masters of the craft, were aghast. It was a feat they had believed to be impossible. Alfred had not just matched their technology, he had surpassed it. The display was a masterstroke of industrial theatre. Orders began to pour into Essen, not just for tools, but for the machines that would power the new age. One of Alfred's most transformative inventions was the seamless railway tire. Before Krupp, locomotive wheels were prone to cracking and failure. Alfred devised a method to forge and roll a single, weld-free band of tough steel that could be fitted around the wheel, dramatically increasing safety and durability. Soon, locomotives on the booming railways of America, Russia, and across Europe were running on Krupp steel, their rhythmic clatter a testament to German engineering. The 3 interlocking rings he chose as the company's trademark, symbolizing these tires, became an international emblem of industrial quality. But it was the cannon that truly captured his imagination and would define his legacy. Alfred devoted himself to the science of artillery with a fanatic's passion. He secured his first major military contract with the Prussian army, providing them with modern, breech-loading steel cannons. Unlike traditional muzzle loaders, these guns could be loaded from the rear, enabling a much faster rate of fire. More importantly, their precision-bored steel barrels could withstand far greater pressures, allowing them to fire heavier shells over longer distances with terrifying accuracy. The proving ground for his new weapons came swiftly. When Prussia clashed with Austria in 1866 and then, decisively, with France in 1870, the Krupp cannons gave the Prussian forces a crushing technological advantage. At the pivotal Battle of Sedan, the German artillery systematically dismantled the French armies, whose bronze cannons were hopelessly outranged and outmatched. The thunder of Krupp steel was the soundtrack to the collapse of Emperor Napoleon III's empire and the birth of a unified Germany, proclaimed in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. In the euphoria of victory, Kaiser Wilhelm I lauded Alfred Krupp as a national hero. The German Empire, it was said, had been forged in Krupp steel. Alfred, once the heir to a bankrupt workshop, was now hailed as der Kanonenkönig, the Cannon King. He ruled his expanding kingdom with an iron fist. He was a brilliant organizer, creating a vertically integrated empire that controlled every step of the process. From the coal and iron mines that supplied his raw materials to the private railways that transported his finished goods, he expanded his workforce exponentially, transforming Essen into a vast company town. He was a stern patriarch to his employees, demanding absolute loyalty. But he was also a pioneer of corporate welfare. Krupp workers received company housing, health care, and pensions, a system designed to ensure a stable, productive workforce, immune to the siren call of socialism. At the pinnacle of his success, he built Villa Hügel, a monstrous, 269-room mansion overlooking the Ruhr Valley, a palace of industry to rival the castles of royalty. It was there he received kings, emperors, and emissaries from around the world, all coming to pay homage to the undisputed king of steel and arms. When he died in 1887, Alfred left his son not just a company, but an industrial superpower, an arsenal so intertwined with the German state that their fates had become one. The mantle of the Krupp Empire passed to Alfred's only son, Friedrich Alfred, known as Fritz. Where the father had been a stern, iron-willed patriarch forged in adversity, the son was a more complex and ultimately more fragile figure. Inheriting an industrial machine of breathtaking scale and efficiency, Fritz proved to be a capable steward, expanding the company's reach with an almost insatiable appetite. He pushed the firm into shipbuilding, acquiring the giant Germania shipyard at Kiel, which would become the cradle of the German Navy. He absorbed rival steel works and arms factories, creating a corporate behemoth that could, as was said with pride, build a modern battleship from keel to cannon, with every component, from the hardened armor plate to the colossal naval guns, originating within the Krupp domain. Under his tenure, Krupp engineers remained at the bleeding edge of military technology, pioneering new steel alloys and developing some of the world's first viable submarines. Fritz was a man of science, a friend and patron of researchers, and he poured money into metallurgy, endowing research institutes. He was a close confidant of the ambitious new monarch, Kaiser Wilhelm II, and enthusiastically supported the Kaiser's grand obsession, the construction of a world-class battle fleet to challenge the naval supremacy of Great Britain. Fritz was a pillar of the German establishment, a cultured millionaire industrialist who moved with ease in the highest circles of Berlin society. Yet, behind this facade of immense power and public respectability, Fritz Krupp harbored a secret that, in the rigid and censorious society of Wilhelmine Germany, was a stick of dynamite. He led a carefully compartmentalized double life. While a devoted husband and father to his two daughters, Bertha and Barbara, Fritz was homosexual. His escapes to the sun-drenched Italian Isle of Capri, a well-known haven for wealthy gay men of the era, became more frequent. There, far from the prying eyes of the German press, he indulged in the companionship of local youths. In 1902, this private world exploded into a public scandal of catastrophic proportions. The socialist press, eager to discredit a titan of capitalism and a friend of the Kaiser, got wind of the stories from Italy. They unleashed a series of sensational articles, accusing Fritz of immoral activities and denouncing him as a sexual deviant, demanding his prosecution under Germany's harsh anti-homosexuality laws. The scandal threatened to engulf not just the man, but the monarchy itself. Kaiser Wilhelm, horrified at the public smearing of his friend and the nation's foremost industrialist, intervened personally, ordering the police to suppress the newspapers. But the damage was done. The accusations, amplified by anonymous letters and photographs sent to his wife, shattered the family. His distraught wife, Margaretha, was quietly dispatched to a sanatorium, ostensibly for a nervous breakdown. For Fritz, the public humiliation was an unbearable weight. On November 22, 1902, at the age of 48, he died suddenly at Villa Hügel. The official cause was a stroke, but it was widely believed to be suicide. The Kaiser, enraged, orchestrated a state funeral, denouncing the journalists as assassins. Fritz's death created a crisis of succession. For the first time, the Krupp dynasty had no male heir. The entire industrial and military edifice now rested on the shoulders of his eldest daughter, Bertha, a quiet and sheltered 16-year-old girl. In an era and a nation where business and war were exclusively the domain of men, the idea of a teenage heiress controlling the armory of the German Reich was unthinkable. Once again, the Kaiser intervened. A solution was devised with the cold logic of statecraft. A suitable husband had to be found for Bertha, a man of aristocratic standing who would be willing to adopt the hallowed Krupp name and assume the patriarchal role. The emperor's choice fell upon Gustav von Bohlen und Halbach, a steady, unremarkable court diplomat. In 1906, in a marriage that was less a romance and more an act of state, Bertha Krupp and Gustav von Bohlen were wed. By imperial decree, the groom was permitted to add the Krupp name to his own, becoming Gustav Krupp von Bohlen und Halbach. The dynasty was secured, not by blood, but by imperial matchmaking. Gustav stepped into his new role with a diplomat's sense of duty. He was not an engineer like Alfred, nor a scientist like Fritz, but he understood power. He strengthened the firm's already intimate ties with the German military, coordinating closely on the development of new weapons. As Europe drifted inexorably towards the precipice of war, the Krupp factories accelerated production. The most terrifying fruit of this era was a top-secret project, a monstrous 42-centimeter siege howitzer, a squat-barreled behemoth capable of hurling 1-ton shells that could shatter any fortress on Earth. When it was unveiled to the Kaiser, he gleefully nicknamed it Dicke Bertha, Fat Bertha, in a coarse homage to the young heiress whose name was now synonymous with the weapon. By 1914, as the guns of August began to roar across the continent, Gustav and Bertha Krupp stood at the helm of an arsenal primed and ready for the greatest industrial slaughter the world had ever seen. The family firm was no longer just a company. It was a central pillar of the German war machine. When the Great War erupted, the power of Krupp was immediately unleashed. The German advance into Belgium was stalled by a ring of modern, concrete forts around the city of Liège, believed to be impregnable. It was here that Fat Bertha made its horrifying debut. The giant howitzers were brought forward, and their massive shells arced high into the sky before plunging down onto the forts, smashing through layers of concrete and steel as if they were eggshells. The swift, brutal collapse of the Liège forts sent a shockwave of terror through the Allied command. The name Krupp became synonymous with overwhelming, technologically advanced destruction. For 4 years, the Krupp works became the fiery heart of Germany's war effort. Its factories in Essen were a hellscape of belching smokestacks and the ceaseless clang of hammers, operating 24 hours a day. The workforce swelled to over 80,000, including, for the first time, thousands of women who took the places of the men sent to the front. From these factories poured the instruments of modern warfare, the ubiquitous 77mm field guns that scythed down infantry in no man's land, the U-boat diesel engines that powered the silent hunters of the Atlantic, and, in a final, fantastical feat of engineering, the Paris Gunnet supercannon with an impossibly long barrel that lobbed shells over 75 miles to bombard the French capital from the stratosphere. But all the steel and all the firepower could not avert Germany's eventual collapse. In November 1918, the guns fell silent. The Kaiser fled, and the empire that had been forged in Krupp steel was no more. The silence that fell over the battlefields of Europe in November 1918 was, for the House of Krupp, the silence of the abyss. The end of the war brought not peace, but a devastating reckoning. The victorious Allied powers, seeking to assign blame for the unprecedented slaughter, identified German militarism as the root cause, and the Krupp firm as its primary enabler. In the eyes of the world, Gustav Krupp was not a patriot industrialist. He was a merchant of death. a cannon king who had profited from the carnage. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, was designed not just to punish Germany, but to permanently disarm it. For Krupp, its terms were a death sentence. The company was explicitly forbidden from manufacturing armaments of any kind. Its most famous creations, the giant howitzers, the long-range naval guns, were ordered to be destroyed or handed over as scrap. The vast workshops of Essen, which had once churned out artillery, were to be repurposed or dismantled under the watchful eyes of Allied inspectors. After a century spent perfecting the art of weaponry, Krupp was now ordered to beat its swords into plowshares, or perish. For Gustav Krupp, this was a moment of profound crisis. He chose to adapt and to deceive. Outwardly, the company underwent a dramatic transformation. The gun shops were retooled to produce locomotives, agricultural machinery, and even mundane items like typewriters and cash registers. Krupp steel, once destined for battleship armor, was now used in the construction of bridges and buildings. In a symbolic display of its peaceful prowess, the firm famously forged the stainless steel spire for New York's iconic Chrysler Building in 1929. But beneath this veneer of civilian industry, Gustav never abandoned the forbidden craft. In secret, design teams, disguised as tractor development units, continued to work on new concepts for tanks and artillery. Through a web of front companies and clandestine partnerships with foreign firms, like the Swedish arms maker Bofors, Krupp funneled its military expertise abroad, keeping the flame of German weapons technology alive in defiance of the treaty. The Weimar Republic era was a time of chaos and survival. In 1923, during the hyperinflation crisis, French and Belgian troops occupied the Ruhr to seize German industry as reparations. Gustav ordered his workers to engage in passive resistance, bringing the mighty Krupp works to a standstill. Tensions exploded when French soldiers opened fire on protesting workers, killing 13. Gustav and his directors were arrested and briefly imprisoned, a move that ironically transformed them into national martyrs in the eyes of many Germans, patriots who had stood up to foreign oppressors. The Great Depression of 1929 brought the company to its knees once more. Demand for steel collapsed, and the workforce shrank dramatically. As social and political chaos engulfed Germany, Gustav Krupp, like many of his conservative industrialist peers, looked for a savior. He found one in the charismatic, hate-filled rhetoric of Adolf Hitler. Initially wary of the Nazis' street-brawling populism, Gustav and his circle ultimately saw them as the only force capable of crushing the feared communists and, crucially, of tearing up the Treaty of Versailles. In November 1932, Gustav Krupp added his influential name to a petition of industrialists urging the aging President Hindenburg to appoint Hitler as Chancellor. They believed they could control him, using his nationalist fervor to restore order and, most importantly, to rearm Germany. It was a Faustian bargain that would lead the company, and the world, into its darkest chapter. When Hitler came to power in January 1933, the rewards for Krupp were immediate and immense. The secret rearmament became open policy. The arms contracts that had been a trickle for 15 years became a flood. The Krupp factories, which had been building locomotives, once again began to forge cannon barrels and armor plate for a new generation of panzers. The firm became a central pillar of the Third Reich's war preparations. Gustav, and increasingly his eldest son, Alfred, became ardent collaborators with the new regime. Alfred, groomed since youth to take over the empire, was a true believer, an enthusiastic member of the SS who cultivated close ties with the Nazi elite. The Krupp family was rewarded for its loyalty. In an extraordinary decree known as the Lex Krupp, Hitler ensured that the company would remain a family fiefdom, exempt from normal inheritance laws, to be passed directly to Alfred as sole heir. It was a public acknowledgement of the firm's indispensable role in Hitler's ambitions. When Germany invaded Poland in 1939, igniting the Second World War, the Krupp works were operating at a scale and efficiency that dwarfed even the frenzy of 1914. The arsenal was fully restored, its furnaces glowing with a malevolent light, ready to serve a master whose capacity for destruction would eclipse anything the old Kaiser could have imagined. During the war, the Krupp Empire became an engine of conquest and atrocity. At its wartime peak, the company employed nearly 250,000 people. A staggering number of these, well over 100,000, were not German workers, but slaves. They were prisoners of war, civilians rounded up from occupied countries, and, most chillingly, inmates from concentration camps, supplied by Heinrich Himmler's SS. At the main works in Essen, and at a purpose-built fuse factory near the Auschwitz death camp, these enslaved laborers were worked to death, malnourished, brutalized, and housed in squalid, guarded camps. They toiled in 12-hour shifts to produce the shells and guns for Hitler's armies. Those who became too weak to work were simply sent back to Auschwitz to be gassed. As the war turned against Germany, the Krupp works in Essen became a primary target for Allied bombers. Night after night, the industrial heartland was pounded into a landscape of twisted steel and rubble. But even amidst the destruction, production continued, fueled by the ever more desperate exploitation of slave labor. In April 1945, when American troops finally entered Essen, they found the once mighty arsenal in ruins. They arrested its master, Alfred Krupp, who had taken full control from his now senile father. The Cannon King's heir was led away in handcuffs, his family's 4-century saga seemingly at an end, its legacy not just of industrial might, but of moral ruin, laid bare for all to see. The end of the war brought a final, grim reckoning at Nuremberg. While the aged and demented Gustav Krupp was deemed unfit for trial, his son Alfred was placed in the dock. In 1948, an American military tribunal found him guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity for his role in the plunder of occupied nations and, most damningly, for the use of slave labor. The verdict was unequivocal. Alfred Krupp was sentenced to 12 years in prison, and his entire industrial empire, the vast accumulation of 4 centuries of family ambition, was ordered to be confiscated. The link between the Krupp name and German steel was to be broken forever. The once proud heir to the Cannon Kings was now a convicted war criminal, stripped of his fortune and his honor, imprisoned in the same fortress where Hitler had once been held. But history, in its infinite and often cynical complexity, had one more turn in store. The ashes of World War II had barely cooled before the embers of a new conflict. The Cold War began to glow. As the Western Allies squared off against the Soviet Union, their priorities shifted dramatically. A prostrate and deindustrialized Germany was no longer a strategic asset. A strong, economically robust West Germany was now seen as a crucial bulwark against communism. In this new geopolitical calculus, men like Alfred Krupp suddenly looked less like war criminals and more like indispensable economic engines. In an act of controversial clemency that stunned the world, the American High Commissioner for Germany, John J. McCloy, released Alfred Krupp from prison in 1951 after he had served only 3 years. More astonishingly, the confiscation of his property was reversed. Alfred walked out of prison a free man and regained control of his industrial empire. The condition was that he would restructure and reduce some of his holdings, but the core of the Krupp enterprise was his once more. To the survivors of his slave labor camps, it was an unforgivable betrayal of justice. To the cold-eyed strategists of the New World Order, it was a pragmatic necessity. As one American official bluntly put it, "We need every ounce of steel we can get." And Krupp can make steel. Alfred returned to a shattered Essen, a pariah in the eyes of many, but also a symbol of continuity to the thousands of workers who depended on the firm for their livelihood. He made a shrewd and crucial decision. Knowing his own name was forever tainted, he appointed a charismatic and morally untarnished manager, Berthold Bates, to be the new public face and chief executive of the company. Together, they began the painstaking work of rebuilding, not just the factories, but the Krupp name itself. Under the banner of West Germany's Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle of the 1950 seconds, the Krupp company rose like a phoenix. With Alfred and Bates at the helm, the firm publicly renounced its past, vowing to stay out of the armaments business forever. It reinvented itself as a champion of peaceful progress. The rebuilt mills of Essen produced steel for cars, bridges, and appliances. Krupp became a global leader in building industrial plants and heavy machinery, a symbol of West Germany's astonishing recovery. Bates, a brilliant diplomat, negotiated deals across the globe, even breaking the Cold War ice by forging trade relationships with Eastern Bloc countries. As the 1960 seconds drew to a close, Alfred Krupp, the last of his line to rule the empire, prepared for the final act of his family's long saga. His only son and heir, Arndt, had no interest in the heavy burden of the Krupp legacy. And so, in 1967, Alfred made a monumental decision. He decreed that upon his death, the entire company, the vast fortune and industrial machine, would be transferred into a charitable foundation, the Alfred Krupp von Bohlen und Halbach Stiftung. The firm would cease to be a family possession and become a public trust, its profits dedicated to supporting science, education, and the arts. Later that year, Alfred Krupp died. For the first time in its history, there was no Krupp at the helm. The 400-year reign of the dynasty was over. In the decades that followed, the company continued to evolve, managed by professionals under the oversight of the foundation. It navigated the global steel crises of the 1970 seconds and 80 seconds, diversifying and restructuring. Finally, in 1999, in a move that symbolized the end of an era, the Krupp company merged with its largest domestic rival, Thyssen AG. The new entity, ThyssenKrupp, became a modern, publicly traded global conglomerate, its activities ranging from building elevators to submarines, from automotive components to naval frigates. The Krupp name, which had once stood alone as a symbol of singular, autocratic power, was now part of a larger corporate identity. Today, the legacy of the Krupps is a study in profound and often painful contradictions. The foundation that bears Alfred's name is one of Germany's largest philanthropic organizations, a powerful force for good. In Essen, Villa Hügel, once the private palace of an industrial king, is now a public museum and cultural center. Yet the name Krupp will forever be shadowed by its complicity with the Nazi regime. It stands as a testament to German industrial genius and a cautionary tale of how that genius can be harnessed for monstrous ends. The story of the Krupps is the story of steel itself, a material that can be used to build bridges that connect humanity or to forge cannons that tear it apart. It is a legacy forged in fire. A dramatic and unsettling chapter in the history of power, industry, and the enduring weight of moral choice.